For more resources, visit rym.org.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
The Local Youth Worker is a daily podcast that's centered on 5 questions each week. Ranging from the practical to the professional, we're looking for answers to the questions you're asking. Whether you're in full-time, part-time, or even volunteer youth ministry, this podcast is for you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Local Youth Worker, a daily podcast brought to you by Reformed Youth Ministries. I'm your host, John Parrott. All this week, we'll be talking to Reverend John Stone. John, welcome.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me, John.
Absolutely. John was originally born in South Carolina and was an RUF campus minister for 11 years for 11 years total, but 4 years at Belhaven College, which is now Belhaven University, right?
That's right.
And then 7 years at the University of Tennessee. He was the assistant coordinator for RUF for 15 years. He's currently the part-time associate pastor at Redeemer Church in Knoxville, and then part-time with RYM, serving as the youth leader advancement coordinator. So, John, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your family before we get into the questions for the week?
Sure. Well, I'm married to my wife, Marissa, and we've been married on July 31st here in 8 days from this recording. We'll be married 25 years, and we have 3 children. Sarah, who's 22, who now lives in Nashville. She just graduated from the University of Tennessee with a nursing degree, and she's going to work at St. Thomas Hospital in Nashville. Then Catherine, our middle daughter, is here in Knoxville. She'll be a junior at the University of Tennessee. Pretty sure she's majoring in business. That's changed. She wants to run an animal rescue shelter, loves animals. Then my youngest daughter, Mary Simpson, just graduated high school and will be moving to Oxford, Mississippi to go to the University of Mississippi this fall as a freshman. And we've lived 22 years in Knoxville, so this is home. And that's us.
Awesome. Well, thanks, John. Again, thanks for making time. I know you got a lot on your plate. This week, what we're going to be doing, just with John being many years in ministry, from RUF campus ministry to working inside a church now as associate pastor, just asking a lot of pastoral questions. So, John, you've served in full-time ministry for decades, and a word that you hear in ministry all the time that's thrown around is this word discipleship. In many ways, it's a simple idea, but I find that people define it, think about it, and practice it differently. So with that said, how would you define discipleship, and what is discipleship, kind of practically speaking?
All right, so that's a great question. I think your observation is pretty profound. I think that discipleship is probably, along maybe the word grace, one of the words in Christianity that everybody uses, and everybody has a working definition, but it's just not the same for anybody. So I think discipleship has 2 components. Someone has to be taught. They have to learn what it means to be a Christian. They have to be taught from Scripture. There's just sort of almost an academic side of what it means to be a disciple. Who is God, and what are the Scriptures, and what is the church, and what is the kingdom, and, what is the story of Christianity. So there's this sort of teaching side, but then there's also a practicing side. And I think you tend to see, and probably because of the way we're gifted and the way our personal bent, you see people tend to sort of go one way or the other. And I think, John, in our circles, since we're both PCA men and sort of on the Reformed side of the evangelical world, our branch of discipleship always certainly leans towards teaching and learning, not so much towards living. Now, people will hear this and go, that's not true. But I think when you set out to disciple, whether it be youth, 20-year-olds, 34-year-olds, you have to keep the living side in mind. In other words, so my illustration is this. I would teach for years as an RUF campus minister. I would teach classes on leadership, trying to get my students to lead from a biblical perspective. And I never got the kind of fruit or commitment or really the results I wanted. I couldn't get them to live it out. But then I began to take them on mission trips And it was like everything I taught sort of suddenly just made sense to them, because we got them in a situation where, especially as we did cross-cultural missions or we did missions to people with real needs, suddenly things like prayer and serving and feeling helpless mattered to them. So that discipleship was really incomplete in my younger days in ministry, because I wasn't going and living with them. And I would say, the more you can observe someone, for instance, trying to do forgiveness instead of just teaching them what forgiveness is, the better your discipleship is going to be. Certainly you have to talk about, forgiveness, the parable of the unmerciful servant. We forgive for exactly the reason that we've been forgiven. That's what you have to teach people. But until you sit with a person and watch them try to forgive someone, you're probably not discipling them. You got to have both. But for me, discipleship, I think for Christians we need to be more practically oriented than historically we've been. And I'm going to mention these are very good things, but if you start a women's or a men's Bible study in your church, and it's a really good teacher, you're going to get 100, 200, 300 people come and people just love to come learn from the Bible. Man, that's a good thing. Whatever you take away from this podcast, that's beautiful. But getting them to go do something with it is discipleship. And it's not discipleship until they're doing it. So, there's this, and I'm sorry that I'm a Bible teacher and can't remember this. It says about Jesus that he chose 12 men to be with him. And that, he wanted them to follow him around and watch how he lived. And I would say that the people I've seen who do the best job at discipling aren't necessarily introverted, extroverted. They're not necessarily great teachers or bad teachers. They know how to be with people. And some of the most profound impact we had on students was that, and what they remember all these years later was eating dinner with us and watching us have a child misbehave and us lose control of the child. Or when they remember driving to New York City and you get frustrated in traffic and stopping. So there's just this, I would just say discipleship, again, two sides, what we teach, but how we live. And being with people in discipleship is much more important than is often talked about.
So as I'm sitting here, which by the way, that was all really good, but as I'm sitting here listening to you, I'm thinking, of James. Don't be hearers of the word only, but be doers as well. So would you say that it's kind of, summarizing that there is a teaching, learning, sitting, receiving, feeding on information, but then the other aspect of discipleship that has to be there is also going out and doing it. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I really agree with that. I didn't think about that passage, but that's certainly what I'm getting at. I mean, I think about the passage where Jesus says, if you're at the altar offering your gift and remember somebody has something against you, immediately get up and go to them. And I think what's profound about that, John, again, in our circles, and I love our circles, is we have a huge emphasis on worship and the importance of worship. And Jesus is saying, if you're in the middle of worship and you realize that there's tension between you and a brother, stop worship and go fix that. That there is this massive amount of energy that you ought to give in being made right with somebody. And again, I love who we are, but we teach so much that I just want to say discipleship isn't discipleship until you're doing something with it.
So what advice would you, typically, we know we're speaking to a lot of PCA people. We know there are EPC people as well that listen to this, but primarily Presbyterian. We've got some listeners that are, outside of those circles as well, and we want to be sensitive to those listening. But what critique would you place on kind of the Presbyterian church or youth worker listening to this about their mode of discipleship, and how would you encourage them to kind of move forward? What advice would you give? Kind of just, again, painting with broad strokes, but we know that there's a lot of commonalities across the board in the Presbyterian church of how discipleship looks. So what's some advice you would give there?
Man, John, that's a great question. I'm saying it's a great question so I can think on my feet well here. Well, I think I'm a good verbal processor. So I would say my first thought is listen to yourself talk to people, both in your teaching context when you're either teaching a larger group or a small group, or listen to yourself as you do one-on-ones, and make sure that you don't only use the word understand. And you also use words like, I want you to do this. So understandably, John, especially as you deal with youth, and all of us are sort of wounded ex-evangelicals. I grew up Southern Baptist, and when I tell my own story, there can be some almost, if you listen to my story and I don't tell it well, like, oh, the church messed me up, because it taught me that works were how I was saved. But discipleship is about sending people out to do something. So the way you just need to make sure that you're not I want you to understand. I want you to understand. I mean, there's a place in discipleship where you say, look, you and I have talked about this 4 or 5 times. Let's don't talk about it again until you've done something about it. Until you've actually, met with that person, apologized to that person, paid that thing back, till you've stopped doing this. And there need to be action words in that. And I think we don't need to be afraid to tell people what to do. I mean, if we're good teachers, we certainly make the free offer of the gospel clear. But people want to know what to do, and they need to know what to do. And so I think that you've got to listen to yourself, and you've got to make sure your language. And I would say the second thing is, and you just need to take people with you more often. If you're a youth worker, one of your things needs to be, I'm with youth too much. When I run errands to Walmart, take youth. When you go play with your kids in the park, now there's a good work, family differentiation. We want to honor that, and please don't. But I got to grab my kids because when I'm sick, so we're going to go to the park. Take a youth with you. As much as you can take people with you, that'll sort of solve that problem. I'm sorry.
No.
I was about to burp right there.
I appreciate that. No, I think we'll leave it in. That's just more real. That's being with you.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Being with me. Yeah.
Good application.
No, I mean that's my good off the top of my head answer to that, John.
No, I think that's great. I mean, that is vital. I mean, that's something that, I would think in youth ministry, I'd run errands all the time for random things, and just think of those times. Okay, look, I can pick up a student. You can spend time with them. They can watch you kind of behind the scenes a little bit more, get to see you where you're not as polished, when you're up and just speaking in a large group. So I think those moments are vital for sure. And so, John, kind of as we draw this to a close, and this might be putting you on the spot a little bit, but if you had to kind of taking what all you just said and give a clear definition of discipleship, kind of make a concise, sentence, 2 sentences, 3, whatever. What is discipleship? How would you answer that?
Discipleship is teaching people the truth about Jesus and his kingdom, and then living that out with them.
Awesome. That's good stuff. All right. Thanks for that, John.
Thanks.